Welcome to the Future Is Borderless Podcast with David Nilssen. We feature top entrepreneurs and thought leaders from around the world, those who bring a global mindset and a unique perspective to their life and business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey, David Nilssen here. I'm the host of this podcast. The Future of Borderless was created to help us connect with business leaders from around the world who have what I call borderless mindset. And the purpose here is to share ideas, new innovations, best practices, things that will help us in both our personal and professional life and allow us to continue to thrive in a very dynamic world. Now, this episode is brought to you by Doxa Talent. Doxa helps businesses to source full-time, highly skilled workers from all over the world. And as a result, these companies can scale faster, increase margin, and improve culture. If you want to learn how to grow your business with offshore professionals, please visit doxatalent.com. All right, well, I'm really excited for today's episode. My guest is Marissa Levin. She's a celebrated leader, author, a co-founder of many, many businesses. And today she is leading Marissa International and is championing enlightened entrepreneurship through key intelligences. There's 5. We'll talk about those, including emotional and organizational. Her work extends beyond the business. She really wants to have an impact on global leadership through her writing, consulting, and aims to empower individuals towards intentional, joyful lives. Her book, Built to Scale, which, by the way, is one of my new personal favorites, and you should run to Amazon and pick it up. I know you can't run to Amazon, but you get the point. Shares her insights on leveraging advisory boards for stronger business success. She holds a master's degree in human resource development and organizational development and is credentialed coach certified by the International Coach Federation and is certified in instructional systems design, emotional intelligence, and the Enneagram. So with that, Marissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And you forgot to mention that I am a very happy Doxa client.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I love that you said that. Certainly, hopefully at some point we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about, offshore talent and sort of how you're thinking about that in your new venture. But for today, I really want to focus on your story and the things that you espouse, because I think there's some real power in that. And given our audience is an entrepreneurial set, I think this will really resonate. So,
Sure.
But I want to talk about your purpose. I mean, as we were starting to prep for this particular call, you shared a little bit about why you do what you do, not what you do, but why you do it. And I'd love for you to just share with people sort of why you exist and what you're trying to accomplish going forward.
Sure. So my lifetime legacy mission is to empower 1 billion people to live their most joyful lives. And look, we all teach what we must master, right? So my lifetime journey, my 30 years of leadership and entrepreneurship, as well as my almost 57 years here on planet Earth, has been filled with great joy as well as great challenges. And we cannot appreciate the light without having some darkness. And so I have been gifted with a very strong strategic mind, absolutely, and very strong communication skills. And I also have a very deep spiritual path. And so I kind of bring it all together in what is really my life's work now. It is a culmination of everything I've built through the last 4 businesses that I've founded, what I'm doing now. And through Marissa International, I've created a joy model. I've created actually 2 joy models. One is about building a joyful life, and one is about joyful leadership. And for the purposes of this audience and the podcast today, we can focus on the joyful leadership model, which is a 6-component model that includes purpose, which is the mission of the company, potential, which is the vision of the company, process, which is what every company needs in order to function optimally, presence, how present is the leadership team with its people, making sure that they feel seen and heard and connected to something larger than themselves. And then we've got people, right? So this is where the advisory board work comes in. It's not just the people inside your company, which are obviously your most important human capital assets, but it's the people outside that you have intentionally selected to be around you so that you can step into your highest potential. And then the last element of that model is play. So purpose, potential, presence, people, process, and play. And if you look at those 6 things, when leaders are intentional about really stepping in and leaning into these 6 things, not only can they build the most joyful cultures, and the company that I most recently sold was Successful Culture International, so I know a little bit about culture, but they can also enjoy the leadership journey for themselves. So it isn't just about building a joyful company, it's about finding joy in the leadership journey. And so that's why I'm here. That's my purpose.
I love this. I remember, so, as you shared earlier, we've had a chance to collaborate now for a period of time. And I remember the first time I met you, I was inspired by how intentional you are around purpose, which is something that I hope that someday people will say about me as well. I think the idea that I think the greatest compliment I ever received is somebody came to an event for our company in the Philippines, and they left and they said, I think I finally got it. I think you are a purpose with a business, not a business with a purpose. And I think leading with that intentionality is really important. But I also think it's harder than it sounds. You lay it out in a framework. It's very clear and it's concise. Talk to me about how to activate this sort of joy model as a leader. What are some examples that you've seen people do really effectively in their own organizations?
So that's such a great question. And the reason I created it is from experience. For, the last 20 years, as I've worked with so many different leaders as a consultant and a coach and a culture expert, the first thing that I've always started with when I work with CEOs and clients is, what are your mission, vision, and values? Yeah. Like it's got to start there. And even when I started my first company, Information Experts, which I grew to about 14 million and exited that about 17 years ago, even when I started that and I had no idea how to run a business, I knew intuitively that you had to know, why do you exist? Where are you going? And what do you stand for? I mean, you've got to have that roadmap. That's your North Star, right? That's your moral compass. Those things, your mission, your vision, your values, are going to drive every decision you make in your business. Where you're going, who you work with, who you hire, who you fire, how you fire, right? Like they guide everything. So they are very much the first part of the framework. And then you look at presence. I mean, I am someone who lives very intentionally and very focused on being present in the moment. And I think what people need more than ever now is psychological safety in organizations where they really feel seen and heard and understood and connected to something larger. So that's why I put the presence in there. We all know that you need process, right? I mean, how many times have we worked with companies where they've got great websites and they've got great marketing messaging, but then you open up the hood and you see a mouse running on a wheel, right? There's like nothing happening inside that's keeping that company standing.
I think you just described every startup that I've ever seen.
Exactly. And then you've got your people, which we know are the most important asset. And then the last one, David, is play. Very, very important to be intentional about play. When I had my first company, Information Experts, where I had 80 people, we actually had a good times committee. It was called the GTC, where people were empowered and responsible for creating fun. We had fun as a line item in our budget. And so there's so much research out there that shows that cultures of play really stimulate innovation, creativity, engagement. We've got companies like Google have indoor playgrounds. So this is not a new concept, but it is something that I very much want to make sure that people are aware of, that it has to be connected to enjoying the leadership journey. That's what it's all about.
It's funny. I talk about sort of an adjacent topic here, but it's directly related to the play comment that you made. I own 2 businesses today, approximately 1,000 employees, and we have no office space whatsoever. If I look back a decade ago, I had an office, everybody in one place, and culture was a lot easier to sort of cultivate because you pick up so much through osmosis. And that culture of play that you talk about is really so much easier to produce. I remember people used to walk into our office and we had this wordle of words from the team, and the number 1 and 2 that were said about our culture were family and fun. And so it's directly on what you talked about. What I have found in the remote world today, fast forward a decade, now we're fully remote, is that it's a little bit harder. You have to be much more intentional about how you build those elements into your culture. So I'm curious, like, how have you seen companies adapt to this remote and hybrid world and still be able to inject the right element of play in there?
That's a great question. And there are a few things. There are companies out there that specifically their whole business model is to bring remote employees together with different online games, right? So that's one thing that you can do, is to create these opportunities where people are coming together and it's not about the work at all. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing that you can do is being very intentional about connecting with your people one-on-one, where it has absolutely nothing to do with work.
Yeah.
Really seeing them as people. Very, very important. Another thing you can do is the way that you express appreciation, whether it's sending them gifts or, as I just mentioned to you, I just am absolutely thrilled with my VA, my assistant from Doxa. I mean, here she is over in the Philippines and I'm here in the Washington, D.C. area. We have such a great rapport and we have a lot of fun together. We really do. We make sure that we're online together over Zoom so that we're emotionally connecting, right? I'm constantly sharing my appreciation for her, sending her fun gifts, right? Like when she does something, I'll send like a standing ovation. There are different ways that you can inject fun in your relationship with your people, right? The culture starts with the person. And so what are you doing to inject fun into the organization? It does take a little bit more effort. It's a very different environment, but also getting to know what they love to do for fun and maybe sending them concert tickets, sending someone, a gift certificate to a restaurant that they enjoy, or a ball game or something where they can go have fun, even though it's not with the company, it's on behalf of the company. So there are different ways to get creative.
I love that. I actually just saw something. I was watching Gary Vee, who very popular sort of public speaker in the world of business, specifically around marketing. But I actually was listening to him the other day. He said something about culture is no longer a one size fits all proposition, but very personalized, right? So, there are some of your team members that want title, others want comp, some really just want time off, others want fun experiences, right? And it's our job as leaders to understand what is their motivation, what really taps into them personally. And I think what you talked about, which is connecting one-on-one, not just to talk about tasks and projects, but to actually understand each other as human beings, is sort of the future of that. So I love it.
And they do, and I agree with him. And I go back to saying that the fundamental human need is to be seen, right? So however they want to be seen is important to know, but to remember that it goes back to really wanting to be seen.
I love it. Let's talk about your book, Built to Scale. As I shared in the intro, I was talking to you about earlier, I've always had a board, even in my first business, which, me and my partner bootstrapped it. So we really didn't have outside shareholders, but we wanted someone to hold us accountable. We wanted to bring some, I would say, just additional capabilities and experiences, competencies to the table to sort of help us with the business. But we did it in a very formal way. And what I thought was really interesting about your book is you talk about how you can do it in a less formal way that's equally impactful. But I'm curious sort of what the backstory is. Why were you inspired to write that book? What happened in your life that sort of led you there?
I love that question. So when I was running my first company, I think we all know that building our first company is like building a plane while you're flying it, right? Like every day you strap yourself into the cockpit, right? You think you have a direction, you think you know where you're going, you think you know who your co-pilots are, and anything can go wrong. You hit turbulence, you hit storms, you've got to change altitudes, you've got to change who your co-pilot is, you change direction. You are figuring it out as you go along. And I was very fortunate that we had a very successful company. Everything looked good, on paper. We had a lot of projects. We had, great people. We were making good money. But I'll tell you, it was the wild, wild west in that company as we're trying to figure it out. And one of my informal advisors said to me over breakfast one day, he said, "You really should put in an advisory board." And I looked at him and I was like, "Well, what's an advisory board?" And, I think this was probably like into my 10th year or maybe my 9th year in business. And he said to me, it's a group of advisors that you pick that help you build your business. So I went out and I'm a fact finder. I like to know how to do things, and that's why I love models and I create great models. And I learned a lot about that, how advisory boards were important, but there was nothing in there on there was nowhere how to do it. And so I came up with the model, I think in the shower, the scale model.
Where every inspiration
I'm
occurs.
telling you, I came up with the idea of like a wet dry board in the shower, because I'm always wishing that I had a place where I could jot everything down, because I'm constantly coming up with ideas. But anyway, so I came up with select, compensate, associate, leverage, evaluate, evolve, and exit. And I came up with the scale model. And there just was nothing out there on how to do it at all. And so I spent about a year interviewing about 150 other business owners, because my voice and my experience is just one, right? Like I'm certainly not the end all be all. And I wanted to hear what was working and what wasn't working with other people. So I interviewed about 150 other business owners, including a lot of EO members. And I took all of that information along with data, and I went away to a writing retreat where I go, a place in Charlottesville, Virginia. I did 2 weekends in a row, 30 hours each weekend, and I wrote the book based on all of my information. And so I built to scale. And then I came back, I figured out how to turn my company into a publishing company, and I threw it up on Amazon, and it kind of took on a life of its own. But it has really taken on a life of its own. And I have a strategic partner with a company called Lodestone Global. They're big in YPO. You may have heard of them, William Tenenbaum, and he's my strategic partner for building boards now. So we've joined forces, and we are in the middle of actually writing the next iteration of Built to Scale, Boardroom Brilliance. We've got that going, and then we're in the middle also of designing an online course for CEOs. So we've got a lot of things happening around the Built to Scale model.
I love it. I do want to talk a little bit about each of those aspects, but can you tell me a little bit about, again, going back to your story, like tell me about a memorable challenge that your advisory board helped you through, and sort of what did that interaction look like?
That's great. So I'll talk fast so I can share too. So the first one is, we were in the government space. We worked with 14 different agencies across civilian defense and intelligence. We were 8A certified, but it still is very hard to break in. And so 2 of our main clients were Department of Treasury, the IRS, and then Department of Homeland Security. And I had met an advisor who had recently retired from the federal government, but this gentleman, he was a legend in both of these agencies. He's the one who architected 2 of their largest contracts. I mean, when he walked into a room, people stood up. Like, he was a legend. I met him because I happened to give his daughter an internship in my company when she applied. Like, I had no idea who she was. She went through the whole process, and we hired her. And then I find out that she's the daughter of this amazing legend in the government. And so I got to know him and decided that he would be a great advisory board member. When I offered him, and this gets to the compensation piece in my book, when I offered him the payment, the payment structure, he said, "I don't need your money. What I need is for you to bring me to the market. I need you to build my brand. I don't have a website. I don't have a logo. I don't have marketing materials." And that is a very good lesson in terms of knowing that, like, you absolutely want to compensate your advisors, but there also are creative ways to compensate. So this gentleman joined the board, and he opened up major opportunities, several $1 million worth of opportunities that didn't even see the light of day. Like, they never hit the street. We never would have known about them, but because of his relationships in the Department of Treasury, he walked us straight into the Chief Human Capital Officer's office. We had to win the work. We had to present the solution. We had to have the past performance, but he opened that door. We never would have gotten that work without him. So that was one example. And then another example is I was at a crossroads of deciding whether or not we should keep our finance and accounting function in the company or we should outsource it. And that is like the worst thing that I should ever be evaluating. And we had someone on the board that was their area of expertise. And he said, let me run an RFP process for you. And so he ran the RFP process, and he's the one who vetted companies that we should have used. And then we had another advisor that was in charge that had recently sold a program management office company, a PMO company. And she helped us establish our project management, our program management office inside our company, and put the whole process in place. Because as I mentioned, we were like the wild, wild west. We had 75 projects going on at one time. I had great project managers, all PMP certified, but the process overall was not strong. And she helped us to build that process. So there are 3 ways that we leveraged our advisors.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny. I remember my first business. Well, one of my first businesses was in the 401k space. And at one point there was legislation pending that could have been impactful to our business in a negative way. And so we were trying to reach people. And I remember one of the pieces of advice that was given about government is they said, you know what, you want the fishing buddy. You want to get in touch with the fishing buddy of the person you're trying to get, because really opening those doors is relationship based. You still have to do the work, right? But I think that's great. Let's continue along that thread though, because what you were talking about are sort of areas that you needed support. That your advisory board sort of helped to augment. And so if you were, giving me advice as an entrepreneur and saying, if I said, hey, I want to build an advisory board, how do I understand the areas where I need to sort of augment my own capabilities? Like, how do you go ahead assessing that?
Great question. And if you notice in my book, you may have noticed that I had a quote in the front by Plato that says, the beginning is the most important part of the work.
Yeah.
So this question reflects that quote. So we work with companies in the select phase with a very rigorous process to identify what I call the holes and the goals of the organization. Because when we're building an advisory board, we want to have dedicated swim lanes and seats for each person. It isn't just enough to go to a conference and meet someone who's really successful or really cool and think, oh, I want them on my advisory board. We need to make sure that again, there's intention behind it. So we do a very detailed analysis up front, a SWOT relative to the board seats. And there's a lot of things that we have to look at. We have to look at, again, the holes and the goals, make sure that there's alignment of the mission and the purpose and the values. We have to make sure that there's alignment from the way that the advisor will show up. And what I mean by that is, like, for my advisory board, I wanted them really entrenched and engaged in my company, like mentorship. Some people only want their advisors to work with the C-suite, and some advisors don't want to work inside the company. So there has to be alignment between what the advisor wants and how they want to show up and what the leader wants from the team. So all of that has to be figured out. And we also do what Doxa does really well. You do the personality assessments to make sure that your assistants are aligned from a work and personality perspective with the client. We do that too for our clients that we build boards for, to make sure that there is alignment from a personality perspective using the Enneagram with the client, right? Because we don't want to have an advisory board team of all of the same types of personality traits and work habits. So we also do the personality traits. So it's a very detailed process to get the right people at the table. If you don't get the right people at the table, the best case scenario is that you're going to have a wasted seat, right? You won't get a lot out of your advisory board. The worst case scenario is that you'll get bad advice and they can lead you down a wrong direction that can potentially harm your company. So getting the front part right, the beginning is the most important part of the work. Really doing the upfront analysis helps the selection process go much more smoothly.
Yeah, it's so easy. I think it's really important feedback, because I think as an entrepreneur, it's really easy for us to invite people in who think and work like us, that confirmation bias. I consider myself a go-to-market and culture person, right? So I love talking to people in those different categories because it gives me energy. It's within where I think I'm both confident and competent, but it's the other parts of the business where we really need someone to round us out. Talk to me about what, there's there's a governing board, right? Someone who has an official position, and then there's an advisory board. Do you use those terms interchangeably, or do you make a distinction between them? Yeah.
No, so the boards of directors that require governance, they are fiduciary boards.
Yes.
When I'm often asked, what are the differences? The advisory board reports into the CEO. The CEO reports into the board of directors.
Yeah.
Okay. The CEO can be fired by a board of directors, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility to either investors or maybe they're publicly held. The advisory board is a wonderful asset, but at the end of the day, the CEO doesn't need to listen to anything that they say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Outside of compensation, because you can always pay somebody for their time, right? That's obvious. What are some of the other sort of non-cash ways that you've thought about structuring a board and making it, how do you, I guess, recruit somebody in absent of just writing a check?
Yeah. And that's a great question, especially for startups, right? Who may be cash strapped. There are creative ways that you can do it. I am very emphatic about the fact that you have to put some skin in the game, some way, right? Like you have to show that you believe in yourself, that you also value the advisor. Most advisors serving on advisory boards are not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they want to stay connected to their industry. They want to continue to be relevant. They believe in the leader. They believe in the mission. They want to be involved, right? It's usually a mix of altruism and a mix of wanting to just serve. It's really not a financial motivation. That being said, we do want to show that we value the people that are investing in us. And we also want to show that we believe in ourselves. So if it isn't going to be a check outright, even a small check, that's for the really small companies, the startups, do something. There are other ways. I just suggested how we did a trade for service, right? With one of my advisors. He didn't want money. He wanted us to launch him. He wanted us to stand up his company. So that's what we did. I had another advisor who didn't want money, but what he was really involved in Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, which is an organization that works with at-risk populations, high school populations, to be able to teach entrepreneurship as a way of getting out of their living situation and so that they can step into their own futures. So he was involved with Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. And he said to me, I don't need your money, Marissa, but what I do need is I need you in the classrooms with these kids. And I want you judging the competitions and I need you at the gala. And I was like, done. So that was a win all the way around. So there's other ways in which you can creatively, monetize and reward your advisors if you just have discussions. I do have a part in the book about the equity and stock options with an interview with an attorney, because again, that's not my area of expertise. But the big takeaway there is that I am very reluctant to encourage founders to give away their company. I mean, it's very easy to give away 1%, 2%, 5% of nothing, because 5% of nothing is nothing, but you're not going to be at nothing. That's why you're starting a business. So you look at 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, you want to make sure that you haven't created a scenario where you've diluted a lot of your ownership for people who are working very part-time for you, right? So in the book, my expert said, the most you want to give away to an advisor is 1/2 to 1/4 of 1%. It's very small. So thinking just creatively about how you can, finance and reward something, like even if it's not large, just so that it is symbolic, that you are grateful that they are believing in you. And then looking at creative ways that work for both of you, just having the dialogue and not allowing that to stop you from moving forward.
Yeah, it's a terrible analogy, but I'm a big believer in dating before you get married. So
Sure.
paying for services before you give equity in exchange, like make sure that you really like working with this person, they're adding the right value, and that you think there's a long-term fit, because it's hard to unwind the equity side of that. So,
and just for two things about that, very important point. If you do give equity away, you want to be sure that there's a restricted stock agreement in place. So in the event that the person rolls off the board, you can buy that back, because the last thing that you want is someone out there, even with a half of percent of your company, which can stop a liquidity event. I mean, that's a lot of power. That was the first thing. And then the second thing was, I'm real, I strongly believe that when you put an advisory board in place, you do a 1-year contract. That's it, 1 year. And I have a client now that we built a board a year ago, and many things changed in their marketplace, and his advisors are not suitable anymore. And so we needed to roll them off, and we were able to roll them off very easily because it was a 1-year contract. You don't need to do 2 years, 3 years, anything like that. Start with a 1-year contract so that it gives everyone maximum flexibility.
Love it. Yeah, I want to just put a pin on something you talked about earlier. I think is important. One of my favorite business books that I read years ago was called The Alliance, and the idea is it's when somebody enters into our company, this is a two-way decision, and that we should have an open dialogue about our job is to prepare them for their next role, right? So they're signing up for a tour of duty, for lack of a better term. And I love how you talked about the advisory board is not just for the C-suite, but that you actually tried to push some of that expertise further into the organization. It's such a tremendous networking and development opportunity for your people. It's equally or more impactful than them working directly with you or your C-suite along the way. So I just wanted to, I guess, double click on that a little bit for the audience. We've got just a little bit of time left, but I want to just, I guess, maybe zoom back out to just some of the macro trends that you see in leadership and organizational culture that entrepreneurs should be aware of today that have maybe evolved faster than we realize. I'm just curious, when you think about those macro trends, what comes to mind?
Oh, what a great question. So what we didn't talk about was my other company, I5 Conscious Leadership. That's the letter I, the number 5, consciousleadership.com. We have a whole curriculum around conscious leadership. And this is where leadership needs to be today. It's a 5-point, that's why we call it I5. It's identity, intention, integrity, insight with a capital S, and then inspiration. And we train leaders, emerging leaders, mid-level, and then also the executive and C-level leaders about how to lead consciously. And we need that more than ever today, where there is a very, very deep awareness of how we are showing up for our people. Psychological safety is the single most important thing in corporate culture today. We have so much unrest all over the world. People are still grappling with the trauma from COVID, from the pandemic, and now on the heels, just so many things going on in the country that are volatile, right? Yeah. So leaders need to be acutely aware and dialed into the emotional and psychological needs of their people, which is exactly why I stood up I5 Conscious Leadership. And now we're taking that curriculum to the government. We're in multiple agencies. We're taking it to commercial organizations. And we're training leaders what it means to really lead with higher levels of consciousness.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a really dynamic environment today. In fact, one of the things that you didn't address that I've actually been thinking a lot about is AI, right? It's funny. I just got back from Vietnam, and I have a team there. And when I was talking to them, I asked them, like, how do they feel about it? And there was this curiosity and excitement. When I was in the Philippines a couple months before, I was on a media tour on a couple of television shows talking to the paper. And in every conversation, they talked about all the jobs that will be lost. So there's also this undergoing anxiety for people, this insecurity that seems to be growing for a certain type of worker. And I think it's something that we have to be aware of as leaders too.
That's a great point too. And not only am I a fan of AI, I mean, I use AI a lot. All of my client organizations that I coach are grappling with AI. Look, everything is a double-edged sword, okay? Yeah. It's here. Companies are using it. It is transforming and re-engineering different types of positions. People have to get behind it. They can't be afraid of it because it is transforming the world of work. But I will say this, because there is so much emphasis on data now, this is why the soft skills, so quote unquote soft skills, why the focus on emotional connection and psychological safety has never been more important. the AI function, the focus on data, it will never, it can't ever replace that emotional connection that leaders have with their people. And that's why this has never been more important, to be more dialed into who your people are, because of the proliferation of AI.
Yeah. My last question for you, if you reflect on your own sort of journey, I'd be curious, like, what's the greatest lesson that you learned, or better put, like, what would you say to your younger, new entrepreneurial self?
Okay, so my answer probably is not going to be typical. Like I mentioned, I have a very deep spiritual path, and because I've built so many companies, and I've sold, and I've put succession plans in place. I mean, I've kind of run the gamut. I view entrepreneurship as a vehicle for self-awareness, to really get to know yourself. Okay. My identities are not wrapped up into my companies. All right. I through my own awareness or awakening, I'm all about getting back to who we are at our core, without all of the identities that the world attaches to us, or that we step into and embody. And so whether that's the identity of being a CEO of this company or that company, or being on this board, or, having this position, or having this amount of money, those aren't who we are at our core. And so the biggest lessons that I have learned is that the shit's going to hit the fan all the time if you're a business owner. It just will. So the opportunity when that happens is, how do I lean into that and learn more about myself? Triggers in our life, whether business or personal, triggers are our greatest teachers. Whenever we are up against something that feels uncomfortable, wherever we feel resistance internally, when something doesn't feel good, where there's a lot of discomfort or fear, that's an opportunity to pause and pay attention to that lesson, because that's where our growth is. So the lessons that I've learned over entrepreneurship, my whole entrepreneurial journey over 30 years, is that everything happens for the sole purpose of teaching us, and of awakening us, and of helping us to dissolve our ego. And every relationship in our life, whether it's business or personal, exists for one reason, and that's to learn about ourselves. And so the entrepreneurial journey is one big vehicle for us to really know who we are. That's what my biggest lesson is.
That's a powerful lesson. We'll leave it there. We've been listening to Marissa Levin, the founder of Marissa International and the author of Build to Scale. Marissa, where can people go to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Sure. So Marissa International or I5 Conscious Leadership, those websites. And then I'm very big on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd like to talk with anyone at all about their journey, how I could help them inject more joy into their life and into their cultures and into their life as a leader. That's why I'm here. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, David.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you being on the show. Thanks again for doing this.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. Be sure to click subscribe to future episodes so you can hear from more top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And we'll see you again next time.